Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast, and I've got another special guest here today. So welcome, Mira, it's good to see you here. Maybe you can start by just telling us something about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Kirsty. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. So I help female online business owners to create their success cycle and to grow their online businesses with ease, fun, and flow by implementing female-centric strategies and taking aligned and inspired actions. So I'm sure we'll get to talk more about that later on, but thank you very much for having me on the show.
It's good that you're here. We met, I can't remember when exactly, it was a couple of years ago now, wasn't it? On LinkedIn, I commented on something and you contacted me, and then we started chatting because we found we had some things in common, especially around languages. Maybe you could also tell us a bit about, what your interest in additional languages is and which ones you speak and how they're relevant for you as a business owner.
Yeah, I think it may have been like 2-3 years ago now. Time flies so quickly. So I'm originally Bulgarian, and I've spent more than half of my life in the UK. I've stopped counting now. And I remember when I was a little, as in like before I was even 10, my dad had said that everyone in our family had to speak at least 2 languages, foreign languages, that is. So, and back then he said that English is compulsory, German was highly recommended, and when I was 10, my dad was working in Switzerland, in the German part of Switzerland. So I went to visit him there and spend the summer there. So trying to kind of use sign language to try and get myself understood, because I didn't speak German at the time, and Swiss Dutch is another matter.
Wow.
Yeah, I think my very first encounter in terms of at school with languages was Russian, because back in the 80s, Bulgaria was still in communism, and Russian was a compulsory language. It was really, really badly taught, or at least my experience. I think in those times, things were breaking up in terms of the system. So there was more like people against it and not wanting to study this language because it was imposed on us and so on. So I'm part of that generation that, looking back at it, I wish I spoke Russian, but I didn't have the best experience, so I didn't learn as much of it. But it definitely would have been very useful to have been able to speak and understand Russian better. I still understand it and I grasp certain things, but it's not a language I can communicate in. So these are like the really, really early days.
But I think that makes a big difference, doesn't it? Like whether the teacher is good, as in good at teaching the language, and also whether it's somebody that you can relate to and you enjoy the lessons. Because even if you don't enjoy a language, I mean, I don't want to say this because I know I have listeners from there, but I don't have that connection with French like I do with some of my other languages. But our French teacher was really nice. I always remember as someone who's really kind, and that helps. But if you have a lesson that you're not so interested in and it's not really well taught, then that's hard to succeed in those kind of situations, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think back then I remember our teacher spent a lot more time dealing with what boy had pulled the hair of which girl and like various other, little kids stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than necessarily, trying to tame us as opposed to really teaching the language. So, yeah.
You had quite a steep learning curve, didn't you, when you came here in terms of learning English at school?
Yeah, so kind of picking up on the story of the languages my dad said were compulsory and how it kind of worked. But eventually I went into French language school in Bulgaria, which is something you get to do either around the age of 13. So I went to study French, and that was like my first formal foreign language that I knew and I spoke fluently. Like anything else before that was not really particularly, I wasn't really fluent. I didn't really get to speak the language. I think I had like vague attempts of Russian and as I said, and also maybe a touch of English, but not very much. So French is really the first foreign language that I got to speak and write fluently, because I went in this French intensive language teaching. Like the first year, we literally spent, I think, 22 or 24 hours a week studying the language at school, in addition to anything at home. Wow. Yeah. So that was very immersive. And we had like a very slim version, maths and sports and Bulgarian. And then that was about it. So, and then my dad, when I was 15, my dad asked me, "Oh, do you want to go to Scotland to learn English?" Yes, Scotland, not England. And I said, yeah, why not? So with barely I am, you are type of thing, being able to conjugate in English, I went over to Scotland and did a summer school for 3 weeks to try and kind of pick up a little bit of the language. And in Scotland, it's really, really difficult because of the accents, and every hill has its own accents. And then I was with my mom, and we came down to England. We came to London, and all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, my ears popped! I can hear, I can understand." Mm. So that was another part of the whole learning the language. And then I returned. I can't remember exactly how long we traveled with my mom, maybe 3 weeks or so around the UK. And then I started with Scottish Highers and standard grade. So learning physics and maths and maybe art at the time, as well as English as a foreign language, or within my first year.
That is a lot. And that's something that I wanted to pick up on from a learning point of view, because we've had a series on the podcast of people who are learning languages as an adult. And okay, you were 15, 16, so you were still quite young, but you weren't learning like at school from the beginning. So what techniques did you have? What helped you to increase your progress, to learn faster, to see that? Obviously you had to keep up with your school subjects, but is there anything that you did to make this process a bit nicer, a bit easier for you?
So I was, I literally turned 16 and when I came over to the UK. So you're right in terms of the age. It was the total immersion. This was a small school where I went to study, and there was only one Bulgarian there who could speak the language, and she did help me with little bits and pieces. In hindsight, probably I went through a big cultural shock, to be honest, because there were so many different changes. But I think immersing myself, going to English language lessons, English as a foreign language lessons, that definitely helped. I went to French lessons because I spoke French. So I used to go to French classes, and I did my hires in French, and I did well, but I went to these lessons not to learn French because my French was much better, but because to learn English.
Yeah, so. and to show a bit of who you were as well. Like if you couldn't really express yourself so easily in English at the beginning, then at least in the French lessons you could say more. You could let people get to know you a bit better because you had the words to do that.
Yeah. We probably spoke more in English then, but because I understood kind of the reverse. So they would be teaching French, but I'm learning English.
And you could help people more. Like if they didn't know French so well, you had something to offer them, and they had something to offer you with the English. So I guess it was more like you had some role to play for them in the French lessons as well, because it was something that you felt more comfortable with.
Yeah.
And were you shy at the beginning, like to speak this whole new language? Was it like hard for you to start talking, or did you start talking very early and use what you learned and then learn a bit more? And how did it work for you?
Very good question. I probably may have been shy, but I don't know, because at the same time, because this was a boarding school, and in the first 3 months, I was a full-time boarder. Well, actually became a weekly boarder shortly afterwards. But when you're immersed with the same people, it's like almost you have no other choice. I mean, yes, I guess you can not talk to people, but there is like, you go and eat with people, you go and sleep. I had a dormitory. I was sharing a room with another girl. Like, you go to classes, and because this was a very small school, I think it was like 100 pupils together with the nursery. It wasn't like a huge school where you have hundreds of several hundreds of people or thousands of students. So I think that definitely made a difference because it was a smaller school. But I did have, as I said, some cultural clashes that definitely didn't do me well. But yeah, you live and learn.
And this experience, because obviously, you've got your language experience and also the experience of a completely different culture. And I guess I think boarding school is a different culture in itself, whether or not you come from another culture. But how does that help you now as a business owner? Because I know that you have a lot of your clients, it's an international client base. So do you think that helps you to relate to them more, or are there things that you've learned that you can use in your business now?
Absolutely. I think definitely even through after school, I went to a university that was international, and my work now, I think naturally foreigners get drawn to foreigners. So I definitely do think that there is that natural gravitation and commonality, where even though English is our common language of communication, international people or people who are interested in foreign languages, foreign cultures like you and I think that's why we got on so well to begin with. So there is always that flair that bonds us, the unspoken word maybe, and so there is definitely something around that brings you closer together, and there is more of that affinity and connection.
Yeah, I think having lived in London as well, I mean, I don't anymore, but it's certainly easier to do that in London as well, because you've got such a rich cultural diversity. I mean, you have in other parts of the UK as well, but I, particularly remember that with, good memories of having people in a team from all over the world at times. And that was really exciting for me to get to know other people, to learn about other places and languages and cultures. You can find it here too in other places, but I think there's something, maybe it's because I'm from London, but there's something special about London in that respect. And I think, as somebody who uses more than one language at work, it's also something that you can understand how people feel. I mean, how would you, I guess when you started working for yourself, you were already a competent English user, but you had to go through that transition period at school. What advice would you give to people who are thinking about using English as an additional language at work? Is there anything that helped you when you started doing that, or were you already really confident when you set up your own business?
I think by the time I set up my business, things were different. But then there was the transition into university, and from university into the workplace later on. So I think probably the bigger transition for me was university, because in a way that's like a completely different language, right? A bit of a working language. I studied economics or international economics. So the international theme definitely follows me around. And I would say the things in terms of what made it easier was, again, immersing myself and thinking in the language, which at some point it starts. And now I can communicate when it comes to work stuff, business, whether it's for the coaching or when I was an economist or a business analyst, it was always much easier for me to communicate and talk about work in English than in Bulgarian, because it's completely different vocabulary. So if you are thinking about working in English, then it's about focusing on learning the language that you need for your work.
Yeah, I think it's also helps you when you're choosing what, I don't know, articles to read, what videos to watch, because I spoke German before I started using German in a business context, but the stuff that I'd learned wasn't particularly useful. Or, how do you negotiate? How do you present? How do you meet people for the first time, not with your friends, but with potential customers or partners? I think it's very different, and you have to make good choices. Like if you want to use business English, you might pick up some useful vocabulary by watching random series on Netflix, but what are you going to need, and would it be better to to find something related to your area of business and to watch or read that as well, because that's possibly the vocabulary that you need to develop. So yeah, and I think definitely thinking as soon as I get to that point where I can think in the language, maybe I don't have all the words I need, but I think that for me, that is a real turning point. So I got there with Romanian. I haven't got there with Portuguese yet, because it's been like 2 months, and that irritates me that I can't do it yet. But when it happens, it makes life so much easier, because you may be a bit more limited in terms of your vocabulary, but the sentences are coming to your mind in the other language, and you're not translating them. And as soon as you can do that, speaking is so much easier.
Yeah. So I think you made a very good point there, Kirsty, that it's about studying and learning in the business aspect of it. Because, for example, yes, I can speak French, although it's been a while since I last spoke French, but my French is conversational. So I can hold conversations about everyday things, about traveling. But again, if it comes to coaching, or back in the day about economics, I couldn't really speak that. And the reason why I can express myself when it comes to coaching, explain and coach people, or even back when it was about economics, is because I studied economics in English. So I studied coaching in English. So whatever it is that you're trying to develop in terms of work, then study a subject. You, I don't know, maybe not necessarily a whole degree, but continue professional development in that is business related in that language directly, so that you can really quickly build up your vocabulary and understanding, as well as professional. But yeah, so definitely immersing yourself.
And there's so much available, like online now. There are courses, there are things you can watch. There are events you can go to physically or online. There is so much we can do. This is a good time to be learning or developing a language, because we have so much available to us. The biggest problem is actually finding the best resources for us, but that's a nice, that's a privileged position to be in, isn't it? So yeah, it's important to do it and to make good choices in terms of what you want to study. And just quickly, I think that you just touched there on the coaching, and I want to come back to it, because it would be good to find out a bit more about what you do, how you help people, what you coach them in. So maybe you could explain a bit more about that.
Of course. So I focus on female online business owners, and the reason it's not necessarily just purely female or people with periods. So because one of the super special things that I help my clients in terms of coaching and to help them achieve their goals and what they actually want to achieve in terms of business or personal life is to use the menstrual cycle. It's not the menstrual cycle is not the everything. However, one of the things that I found as a coach was that it's great. You come up with a goal that you're really motivated to follow through and you really care about. For many of my clients, that's around reducing stress and overwhelm and having a more balanced and healthier lifestyle, because running your own business can become auto-consuming, especially when you love what you do. And maybe sometimes that's been your hobby and your special interests, and then kind of it's much harder to draw the line. But eventually some of my clients have experienced burnout, so they realize that there needs to be a bit more of a better balance in terms of, and segregation in terms of how they manage their time and energy, and how they can also be more productive. And using the menstrual cycle really helps you to get in a flow to help move forward and achieve what the goals that you want to achieve for yourself. Because at the same time, very often we don't necessarily know the talents, but they can also be double-edged swords. So for example, in the ovulatory phase is when you have the most energy and you feel super excited, and you might go, oh yeah, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and you overcommit and you overpromise, and then your energy dips and you're maybe like, oh no, all these things that I said I was going to achieve and do, and I haven't been able to. And then you start beating yourself up for not having done all the things, and it can get into this really bad vicious cycle. And in some cases, people push through when they really need to give themselves a bit more time.
I committed to this. I'm going to do it, even if I have no energy left at the end. I will finish this because I said I. But that's not healthy either.
No, definitely not. So, but thank you for putting your hand up and being honest, Kirsty. But that's exactly it. So it's balancing these things out, knowing kind of when you have more energy to use that in a way that serves you, but also help you to kind of maybe ease off the reins a little bit, so that you don't overcommit and then end up in that vicious cycle. Or in some cases, I have clients who procrastinate because maybe they think that they're not good enough, and various other unhelpful thoughts when they're really amazing at what they do, to help them to use the cycle to take aligned, inspired action so that they can grow the businesses that they want to have, to enable them to lead the lives that they want.
Okay, so I've seen you talking a lot about this on LinkedIn. Is LinkedIn your main platform of choice, or are you in other places as well?
Yes, LinkedIn is really my main platform. I've in the past dabbled on Instagram and Facebook, but really now the only one I check on a weekly basis is LinkedIn. The others don't really get much coverage. So if you want to learn more and kind of follow more about the tips that I share, LinkedIn is definitely the best place to connect with me.
And I'll add that to the show notes page. I'll add your link. And how do you pronounce your name? I was going to come back to this, but how is your name pronounced?
So the short version is Mira. The long version is Mira.
Okay, and your surname?
Rutter.
Okay, so you go by the short version. Is that what everybody calls you, or did you find it easier for people to pronounce, or?
Yeah, so many people, I love Mira. It actually means gold and peace, as in
nice.
The opposite of war. And gold is after my grandma, who sadly passed away a couple of months ago. However, very often people, even in Bulgaria and especially in the UK, or foreigners, mispronounced it, decided to abbreviate my name in ways that I really hated. And one of my oldest friends used to call me Mira when I was little, and I think my dad used to call me Mire, or dress me as Mire, and so I decided, okay, let's keep it simple, Mira for short, and so that's kind of how why it's Mira as opposed to Złotomira, and Rutter is my married name.
Right, I think that's important. Like, names are, they are what people call us by. Yeah, I have people who call me things other than my name, but that's something they do, that's between us. But like, generally when you meet people, you don't want them to be calling you something that you don't feel comfortable being called, so you kind of took control of the narrative there and decided what that should be, because I think it's important to try and learn people's names and what they want to be called, but at the same time, I guess you've made it easier for people to do that and not to change your name in ways that you don't feel comfortable with.
Yes. Having said that, my name is still pronounced wrongly very often, but what I've noticed is that more often than not, and I don't know why that is, in the UK, people tend to get it wrong, and they're more likely to say Myra, but people from the US tend to say Mira. I don't know why, but the two...
I mean, that is a name, but it's spelled differently, so I'm surprised by that, but okay.
Yeah.
Pay attention, English people do better.
Yeah, so I don't know why the Americans are more likely to get it right, but they do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will add your link to LinkedIn. Do you have anything coming up, not like in September, October, that you want to tell people about? And you do workshops sometimes?
I do have workshops and masterclasses, and the best way to find out when they are is to connect with me on LinkedIn or sign up for my newsletter. And when you sign up for the newsletter, you can get your own VIP alignment guide that talks you through how to create a life that is aligned with yourself and what's important to you, your strengths and your priorities. So we can pop a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your story. And yeah, I hope you'll get to meet some interesting people, podcast listeners, and that other people will be able to find out more about what you do. Thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Kirsty.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.